Hello, yep. Hello, everyone. Um, nice to see you all today. Welcome back for part two. I think the attendance is still pretty low. We're at 60 today, which means that so we normally have 200, and then yesterday we had like 110 or something, which is no doubt from iteration one. And then today we get to deal with the people who went to yesterday's lecture and noped out, the people who are asleep, and of course the people who skipped yesterday's lecture, so that there's no point in coming today. So that's good. No, it doesn't really matter. I'm not one of those like lecturers who's like, oh, no one wants to come to my lecture. Oh, that's good. Some people here are still asleep. That's excellent. So what we're going to do today is we're basically going to go over the last 20 minutes of yesterday's lecture, which is where things kind of got a bit, unique and challenging, and then we'll kind of tie the topic off. So let's just kind of quickly rehash some of these things. So I'll just briefly cover it conceptually, and then we will go through in detail. So we talked about an API, right? Now, the simplest way to explain this API that I've been talking about is that if you imagine an API, like this is a bit of an oversimplification, but if you imagine a Flask server that exists, right? We write it in Python. It has a bunch of URLs that you call. Each of those URLs has like a get, post, put, or delete method attached to it. And then we use like a client, like the one I have up on the screen here, this advanced REST client. We use something like this to basically talk to it, right? And how we talk to it is through some kind of common interface. So we looked at an example yesterday of a couple of web APIs, and we talked about how this is quite similar in the sense that a web API is honestly just like an interface, just like iteration 2. It's just an interface with some instructions. These are the URLs you can call. These are what you pass to them. These are what they return, and here's what they do. It's like a description. So that's really the whole thing. And we kind of poked around with this yesterday because maybe I can just open Slime. We kind of had a look at our crud.py file here where we had a bunch of different routes. And I'll run this server again. So if I go into... So if I run crud.py, basically this is running that Flask server. I'm assuming everyone who's watching this lecture watched yesterday's lecture, so I won't cover the basic stuff. But this Flask server is running, right? We've got our setting up the server up the top here. We have our running the server down the bottom. And then we've got 4 chunks that define the 4 different URLs that we can use on this server. And we've got... Oh, no. Oh, why is it so sad? Chrome? Chrome, are you okay? Chrome. Oh, God. Yes, I am assuming that everyone who watched this paid attention to yesterday. That's kind of a prerequisite. Well, this is a shame. We'll give it like 10 seconds. Oh, that was good. ARC. Great. Yeah, so we have these like 4 different routes here. Now I only saved 3, but let's quickly do the 4th one. I'll just change this really quick to, I think it was 2. Save. 2. Save as new. Yeah, so we've got these we've got these 4 different API calls, right? So you'd call these API calls. You have a getter, which calls, 5000/1. You have a post, which calls /2. You have a put, which calls /3, and you have a delete, which calls /4. Now remember again that the put, post, delete, and get are they don't mean anything programmatically, right? Like you could just change one of these, like how we have this like delete one here, how we showed that you can call that delete one. I could just change this delete to like post, and then I could just change this here to post. And if I restart my Flask server, it will just work, right? Like these post put, they're instructional. They're there for people like you to categorize different types of routes that you can call in Flask. So they don't like mean anything. Again, I just want to emphasize that because some students are like, oh my God, without the delete keyword, I can't delete anything. Like without the post keyword, I can't create anything. And it's like, no, you can do whatever the hell you want. It's just they're there to help other people understand things. I mentioned it's like function names where you can call functions anything you want. It's not going to stop anyone doing anything, but it might confuse them. It's a little bit like a variable name, except you can only have 4 of them. Like, there's not like other methods. Like you can't just like, put like mango here or something. There's no like mango method. There's a few, custom, I don't know. Maybe there is. Never tried this. I mean, you wouldn't want to. There you go. You can do a mango method. Things you learn, right? Things you learn on the job. You would not do that. You will get slapped for doing that. Metaphorically, physically, whatever it is. Not physically, I guess. Depends how bad your boss is. Okie dokie. So, poggers. Yeah, we should change them all to different fruits. Have like the lemon and the mango and the melon and the apple. And I can see here that are different people calling these? Or is that me? Okay, not sure. So you see this works, right? Now, I think you all kind of get that like this is a web server and these are all URLs, and when you call URLs, a function runs. I think that's quite straightforward. And you can see that this ARC program is capable of putting in a URL and a method and then calling it, right? That I feel like most of you should be able to wrap your head around. Where things get a bit interesting again is on the input-output side of this, right? Because like, sure, you could just call a web URL that doesn't take in any variables and doesn't return anything, like a function that you call with no parameters that doesn't return anything, like the clear function from iteration 1. You could do something like that, but no, most of the time you actually want to pass in something and get something out. Now the getting out part is super easy because it's super consistent, and we talked about this briefly yesterday, whereby you can return things a whole bunch of different ways when it comes to web servers, but the way that we're kind of encouraging you to do, because it's a very common way that things are done, is you actually return JSON, right? So the return type is JSON. In fact, we might even be able to see this toggle raw response. Where does it details? Text HTML. Okay, it's sending it as HTML for some reason. That's okay. So what's actually happening here is we are packaging up some kind of response, and we are just using the JSON dump-s or dump string dumps function that turns a Python object into a string. So all of these URLs, all of these routes, just return as JSON. Like it's just a string. This is really helpful because, like, the front end that you're not having to build, but the front end that you're provided, it works with the interface, the same interface that you're programming to, right? The channels create, auth register. But it's expecting JSON. It's written in another language, right? It's not written in Python. So it needs a standard interface to be able to interact with it. And that's why we return everything with JSON. So pretty much all of your functions will always look like this, like return dumps and then something. The hard part, or the more confusing part, is how things are taken in. Now, again, I mentioned yesterday that with GET requests, one of the general principles of GET requests is that they don't have a body. And you'll notice this. Notice when I like cycle through post, put, delete, they all have a body kind of area where you would you describe the body, and you're kind of like, what is the body? Think of it like the parameters, right? It's like it's the meat of the request. Like you call a function and then you give it the stuff, and the body's like the stuff of a HTTP request. So put, post, and delete, they all have this body here, and we put the same thing in the body, and we put a JSON string in there. So similarly, JSON is a standard interface whereby a front end and a back end can communicate with each other, and we're putting in JSON. Like, we're saying that the server is given JSON. Now, there's lots of different ways that you can interpret this, right? You could actually read the request raw, I think. So, like, if I just try, like, print... Like, let's try this out a little bit. Let's see what happens when I do print request on the post method. So if I restart the server and I go run, you see it prints out some kind of request object, right? Some general, like this is a request object in Python. I think I can print out request.body. So if I run that again, because there's a body property of request. No, there's not. Let me find that. Python Flask request body. Flask.data, flask.args, request.args. Okay, it's an even better abstraction than I thought, right? So like, what we can do here is we can actually say request dot form. Okay. That's far less fun than I thought. So basically, when you pass in things as a body, there's like 3 places you can get data from with an HTTP request. The first one is getting it from the URL, right? You see this one here that says request.args. You get it from the query string, and a query string in a URL is everything after the question mark, and you can see them everywhere, right? Like if I go to maps.google.com, you can see the second I click somewhere I should get it. They do things a bit funny. I don't know. Let's just go to Google search. Probably overcomplicated that one. I type in a search and I get like everything after this question mark here is the query string, right? So that's what this first part is here. It's like request.args is all the data in the URL relating to that query string. And then the other 2 that we care about are either request.form or request.json. And both of these are passed in the body of the request. It's just that if it's not in JSON, there's another type of format you can send it in that you can extract variables from, right? So we're not really doing that one. So you might see request.form on the internet. That's not really how we're sending data. We're sending it with JSON because it's nice and easy. So if you send stuff in the body as JSON, then you can extract it with request.json or request.getJSON, basically, which are kind of the same thing. So in this case, it's like request.json will go look at the body of the request. It will look at all that string there, and it will try and like JSON load it back into some kind of variable I can use. So it will take this here and it will turn it into an actual Python structure, which is how I can use it here. So this is basically like an echo request whereby I take in some data and then I spit the exact same stuff back out. So pretty straightforward stuff. Yes, so post, put, delete are all the same there. With post, put, delete, you can also pass things in via the URL. Like you can use this request.args here. In fact, I'll just show you. Like I'll just do one here. I'll just say like name equals request.args or age equals that. And then I'll just populate the return with like the age. So now you'll see that I can not only pass the body in here and extract that via the getJSON, but I can also actually add URL variables here like age equals 18 and click send. And you'll see that in my output here, it's actually got age in the output. That's because it echoed the first 2 keys because of me getting it from the body right here with the getJSON, and then I can get the age from the URL. So you can get data from the URL in all types of HTTP requests, right? But you can only get data from the body in the non-get requests. Now, generally speaking, again, we won't even be sending data via the URL in, post, put, or delete requests. It's just not like the convention we'll use in this course. Oop, age is null. Yep, so that makes sense because the age is no longer present in the URL here. So because it isn't present, request.args.get return none here, essentially. So Prafis said, is the headers and body stuff from HTML? It's not really from HTML. This is like HTTP is a protocol that allows people to communicate via URLs to exchange resources, right? And HTML is just a type of thing that is returned. It's a document type. You can return HTML, you can return images, you can return JSON. They're just the resource types, but HTTP is like the protocol that actually allows you to share these resources together. So yeah, with the get request, um, we pass everything via the URL. You notice that ARC doesn't even give us a body, because it's like, sorry, you don't have bodies with HTTP requests, with GET requests. You just have like, you just put it all in the query string. So this one still works, right? You just put the data in the URL. And you can see that the structure of the data in the URL here is that we use the question mark to separate the URL from the query string. And then within the query string, it's a series of key pairs with an ampersand between it. It's like a really predictable pattern. And again, you'll see it even in like the Google URL here, where it's like, you know, source equals HP. I don't know what that means. Ampersand EI equals some giant string that goes on for a while. I have no idea what that is either. Then it says end Q equals ZGFDS, end OQ equals ZGFDS. So there's all this data kind of encoded here in the URL. And the way it works is that this is your actual domain, right? So this defines the server you're contacting. Everything after that first slash, before the question mark, is what you'd call your route or your path. And that defines the resource you're looking for, right? That's like here, like these are all our paths or routes. So like it's all happening on one server. These are the different routes, the different ways of communicating with it. And then everything from the question mark after is kind of like arguments or parameters of a function, if you will. And it's kind of like, why do we pass parameters in the URL? The reason for that's actually really simple. Like, why don't we just pass everything through the body? Because obviously you can think of some downsides of passing everything through the URL, right? Like, if you pass, for instance, someone's password through the URL, that's going to be bad. That's not going to end well for you, because you're going to be exposing their password. But one of the downsides of putting things on the body is that, think about what happens when you bookmark a page or you send a page to a friend. You're not sending them the body of the request, right? You're just saying, this web server, this path or route, here's what I want you to see. And none of that body is there, right? It's all just in the URL. So one of the benefits of encoding things in the URL of a website is that we can actually bookmark it and preserve state, or you can send it to a friend and preserve state. And the example I always give people is, how many of you have seen something you like on the internet, or seen a page you want to send to a friend, and you've sent it to them and they've been like, what, you just sent me the homepage of Facebook or something, right? Like, and you were like, no, I sent you like a particular photo, and then you click on the link and then it loads the home of Facebook and you're like, oh, damn it. And that's simply because there's like that information that's loading that page is usually happening behind the scenes in the body, and it's not really happening up in the URL. So, you know, that's the benefit of URLs. And these are just parameters to functions. Like, if you think about web pages, like functions with parameters, where this is the function and these are the parameters, then you could also understand here, it's like, see how this like URL has like Q equals Z whatever. I could just change this manually to COMp1531, and then you'll see that immediately this will just change the search query here. Because all this page is a route that's being given parameters to load, and I've just changed those parameters. So when my web browser talks to the server, it's like, here's all the parameters. I'm searching for COMP1531 here. Yeah, so Pref says, so header is like the link and display, and body's like the return value. Header's really, like, I don't really want to go into a header because it's not really that interesting. There's tons of stuff in it, but headers are, it's hard to equate headers to kind of classical understanding of programming. It's all network headers and stuff like this, or like a file header. The main thing is that the body or the URL actually represents the data or the parameters of the function you're essentially calling. Joel says, what is the difference between output and the screen in the middle? I don't know what you mean by screen in the middle. I assume by output you mean these things here. Like this stuff down here. By screen in the middle, do you mean like this column? Column of routes? Oh, when I'm on body. Okay, what is the difference between output and the screen in the middle? That makes sense. So in this case, the screen in the middle is the actual body, right? Everything under this body header, but before this 200 OK, is the actual body that we're sending. And that's what we're actually capturing when we do request.getJSON. This is the data that the front end or ARC is sending to the server. Everything under here is what you're getting back from the server, right? And you're sending it to the server in JSON, you're getting it back in JSON. So this data1, data2 is actually what's being inputted by the server, and then the server's returning that. And just to maybe make this a bit clearer, if I say maybe just turn this into an F string for a second, and just did this, I could just say like capture this, like that. And then if I reset this, you'll kind of see the difference here pretty obviously, which is like, this is the input that I'm giving it, and then I'm taking that input here, storing it in variables, and then outputting it back. So input here, output there. We're extracting the input to the server here, and we're outputting something back to whoever's calling us here. Where's the body outside of the Arc app? So, I mean, there's lots of... It depends on the way you're doing it. You can't really send a body easily with like a web browser, but you wouldn't, because that's not what you'd use a web browser for. Generally, you're either going to use something like this ARC, or you're going to use programming languages, which we'll get into in a sec, to make these requests. So again, this is like a server here. So, I mean, I've pretty much covered... I think we'll look at... We looked at the CRUD example. We went through all of this. Point.py. Okay, we'll have a look at point.py as a second example, and then we'll talk about the rest of this stuff. Great. Okay, so yeah, you'll absolutely need the ARC app for other kind of app for iteration too. Okay, we're going to look at like one more example here, which is going to be this point.py. Now, the reason I want to show you point.py is because like so far what we've been talking about, the class stuff's a little bit much for me. Let me just strip this class thing away. I really don't want to overcomplicate this one today, because we're just teaching classes progressively less and less in this course. So points equals x is none, y is none. Okie dokie. Let me just fix this up really quick. Shouldn't take me more than like 20 seconds. Point equals. Okay. Taylor says, I feel like if I understand something in this course, I understand it about 1.5 weeks after it's taught. That's perfect. That's roughly where we expect. It's exactly 10 days, in fact, that we expect students to understand things after. So you're right on the money. Great stuff. Let's have a look at this file together, because this is an example about how you might actually realistically use some kind of HTTP server. And I'm just going to bunch this up just a little bit more so that I can get it all on one screen for you. Great. So this is a server that we have right now. It should look very similar to what you've seen before, whereby we have our setup up the top. Oopsie. We have our if name equals main down the bottom here. And we also have our, what would you say? Our 4 routes here, right? Get, create, update, and delete. We, get, post, put, and delete, I should say, right? So let's actually look at what these things do, because they might be a little bit complicated. Let's go through them. Well, the first thing is we're defining a point in Python, right? It's going to be a global variable. And it's a dictionary which contains two keys. One of those keys is X and one of those keys is Y, right? And by default, they're both none. So what I'm going to do here is that when someone calls /point/get, which is a URL on my server, I'm going to set X and Y to 0 by default, right? Just local variables. These are just local variables. And then I'm going to check if point X is not none and point Y is not none. Then I want to set X and Y to be the values of like point X and point Y, right? And then we're going to return a JSON dump of the X and Y variable. So basically we've got this global variable which has an X and Y in it. And then if they're both not none, we will return those values. And if they're not, it'll kind of default to this like X and Y variable here. Does that make sense? Like, let's make sure we're all on the same page here. Does everyone understand the program as if it was like, I'll just comment out what we don't care about at the moment. Like that. Does everyone understand this? Yeah, okay. So let's try and run this one. I'm going to run Python 3 point.py, and it's running on port 20,000. Okay, oopsie. Oh no. It's running on port 20,000. So let's actually run that. So I'm going to, how do I do a new request? Oh, I just override it, sure. So I go get here and I do 20,000 because this is the URL, this is like the server where it's running, because it tells me this in the terminal. It's like, okay, your server's running on this IP address, this port, and then the URL is /point/get, right? So we have the server, and then we have the resource or the route. And then I click send, and we get a response back in JSON, which makes sense because we returned a dump string of a Python object, which gives us the object in JSON, which is just a dictionary with X and Y keys. And then X and Y here are the variables. So Praf says, why did it change? What are you asking? Oh, why did the port change? Is that what you mean, Praf? Like, why did the port number change, or are you asking if something else changed? The port just changed because I changed it here. Like, I literally just wrote 20,000. It could be the same, but like sometimes it'll change for you. I just change it so that like you kind of used to the idea that sometimes these things change when you're developing things. So, you know, I just wrote it as 20,000 because I can. Yeah, exactly. So, and then you can see here that what happens is we set an X and Y variable to be 0, which is the values by default. And then if my global variable point, if its X and Y key is not none, if the value at its X and Y key is not none, then I set X and Y to be the value of those dictionary items. So you'll see here, if I set this to be like 2 and 22 and 33 instead, and I restart my server, and then I click send, that I get 22 and 33, right? Because it's checked, are both of those point values not none? And they're not. But let's start this off. So I got like X and Y here is none. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my second route here, which is create. VLab's just a bit frozen. Praf says, can you do the question mark X equals 0 or Y equals 0, or is that not going to work? So Praf, what you're doing here is you're conflating, I think you're like, so if we look at the CRUD example, the difference with the CRUD example was that we were actually asking for things from the URL, right? So like in our get example, we were like, can you get us something from the URL? Whereas like what we're dealing with here, we're not really interested in our user passing us anything in this case. We're actually just interested in them saying, get something, and we'll just give you something. So there's like, it's like a function without any parameters here, right? In this case. So there's just no parameters to this function. So if we have point get, which is a get method, and we call it, we get some result. That should make some sense. ARC is just frozen on me again. So, Praf, your question about, so you can't do the question mark in the get method. I mean, you can do the question mark in the get method. As I said, it's the one place you can use the query string, like that you can, like you should be using that question mark stuff. It's just that we're not interested in it in this case. Like, so when you say you can't do it, it's like we're just choosing not to do it. It's like, again, if you wrote a function without any parameters, it's not like you can't extract anything. It's just like you've chosen not to, kind of thing. And yes, if we did want to write our function that expected some query string stuff, we would have to use our request.args that we used in our CRUD example here. We'd have to do something like this. Okay, so we have this point/get. ARC is really crapping its pants. I'll just restart it. I think it's Chrome. I think Chrome is just grumpy. Or BLab's grumpy. Or everything's grumpy. Okay, applications, internet, Chrome. So elegantly loaded. So we have our get URL, and what that'll do is that'll actually get the variable. Now what we're going to do next is I'm going to use a put method, because you know that a put method updates things, right? Like that's what we said put is. On the CRUD, create, read, update, and delete. Put will update stuff. And what we're going to do with put is actually going to be really simple. Yep. Once Chrome loads up. Oh my god, Chrome. What's your issue? Close. Yeah, so CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete, which correlates to the HTTP methods of, post, get, put, and delete. All right, VLab, come on. Stay with me. I'm so kind to you. I tell the students to use you. Now you're being grumpy today. Hey. All right. Internet, Chrome, apps, ARC, Oh, it's Chrome. It's just Chrome today. I'm not sure what its problem is. Okay, let's just have a chat through this. So basically, when I call /point/update, which is another URL, it's another route, on the put method, what's going to happen is that I'm going to give it a body of JSON, and that JSON is going to have an X and a Y key in it, right? And then I'm going to essentially set my my server's point X and Y to be equal to what's passed in. So what I mean by that is, oh my lord, just work for me today. So I've got this this point get thing here, and I'm just going to save that one. I'll just save it as point get. Alright, okay. Every time I go to quit it, it's like, no, stay, please. Okay, history, great. So I got my point get here. Now, we know we have this other method called point update, and we know that it's a put, right? And a put is for update. So I can call it point/update. I could call this anything I want. I could call it point/lemon, right? Now, what do we know about this? We know that this particular route expects a body which contains in a dictionary, it expects an X and a Y variable, basically. So in the body here, I'm going to say that the X variable that I'm going to pass in might be 55, and the Y variable that I pass in might be 66. So this is in the body. So the body is what is sent to the URL which goes to the server, right? So now now let's actually, oop, my water, oh god. Now let's actually trace through this. So let me save this one as point put. Oh god. One sec. Don't override your routes. Point get, and then I will, yep, no body, great. Save, point get, yeah, save as new, great. So here's what happens, right? Imagine this life cycle, this is really important. I'm going to start up my Flask server. I'm going to send the get request. The result I get is 0, 0. Because by default, when my server starts, when this Flask program runs, my point has an X and Y key that are none by default. So when I call get on it, it just returns 0 as like placeholders. If I then go to my put route here, once ARC stops having a mood, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a second request to my server. That's a put request. And what this put request is going to do is it's actually going to update the point variable, right? A little bit like how, think about your iteration 1, how you have like your data store, your global variables, and you like call a function and then you call another function, and it's like all operating on the same global data. So when I call put here and I click send, it'll do it, but you'll also notice that it returns nothing. So basically it's going to return me the JSON dump of an empty string. And the JSON dump of an empty string just looks like this here, right? So we call update, we extract the body variables as JSON because we're passing everything around as JSON. We update the point X and Y to be what's passed in's X and Y, like that. And then the output is nothing. But here's the thing. Now that I've done that, if I go back and I call my get method, my /point/get route, what happens then? Like, what are the values going to be? Someone tell me. What are the values going to be if I call get again? See if anyone... Yeah, perhaps says it would have changed to 55 and 56, right? Because like these are like global variables. So, you know, where like we have a point, we call get at 0, we call update, which changed it, and then we call get again and it's changed. It's really just like iteration 1. It's just functions operating on some system that it exists while a, you know, process is running in this case. And then we can also have a delete method where what a delete method does in this case is it doesn't take in any parameters. It's just going to set point X and Y to be equal to none. Like that. That's all it will do. So it will just like reset it. So then if I come back to ARC here, Moody ARC, the two other tools you can look at are called Postman or Insomnia. ARC is typically very light, so it's probably actually going to give you the least grief. I'll do another method request here to a delete, which will remove them. If you just give it a sec. Who's going to come to my AMA tomorrow? I wouldn't come to my AMA. But, you know, some of you might, because you're nicer than me. If you use Opera, there's an app called RESTman, which looks like it does the same thing. Yeah, there's tons of these things. Perhaps says, will there be an ARC guide anywhere? Not really. I mean, there's probably guides on the internet, though. You know, it's like it's not that complicated, and I've kind of gone through the key parts of it here. The AMA is all online, by the way. I think COVID and stuff means it's not like in person. I haven't taught in a lecture theatre for I think nearly 12 months this week, which is crazy. So I've got this delete method here, which is going to be /point/delete, right? And it doesn't need a body, so we're just going to delete the body because it doesn't take in a body. And I'll just save that as well. and then we'll just try this out. In this case, I'm not going to do a create method, a like post method, because there's actually like nothing to create here. Put's enough, because it's kind of like you kind of have the variables, they exist. It's just like put is updating it, right? So if I save this to point delete, right? So you'll see here that once it loads up, takes some time, we'll just run it one last time. Now, while this is happening, I just want to explain, you can create new variables. You can do anything you want. Like the thing about this whole Flask topic is that we're just really showing you things you can already do with functions. It just happens that you're doing it on a web server, right? Like you have routes. They take in a body or a query string. They output JSON. It's the same as a function. Takes in parameters and outputs stuff. It's like you can literally do the same kinds of things. So I'm just going to quickly show you this again. If ARC, we're so done with ARC today. Some days it's just bad. Today appears to be one of those days. Or it's just VLab, I'm not sure. Why not both? Yeah, exactly. Maybe I can close Chrome. Will that close ARC? I'm not sure. Oh, maybe that was the whole problem. Okay. Oh, no. I don't know. No, it seems okay. So, I'm going to do I'm going to get. I click send, I get 0, 0. I do a put where I update it to be 55, 56. I get no return. I go back to my get. It's now 55, 56. I can get that as many times as I want, and I'll keep getting it. If I go to point delete and I click send, I get a no response body. And then if I go back to get and I click send, I get 0, 0 because it's been deleted. And then I could put again for 155 and 166. And I click send and that will update it. You know what I mean? So like this is an actual web application managing state. Now, the last thing I want to talk about before we get onto the request library is... Oh, sorry. Real tired. The request library is that the difference between put and post, right? The difference between put and post. So both of them are kind of about changing stuff, but we say that post is about creating and then put's about updating. So what's the difference between the two? The simple rule is actually very, very straightforward to follow. When you put something, whether you put it once or you put it 1,000 times, the state of the application after the put should be the same. So what I mean by that is here, I have this put. If I click this like endlessly, every single time I click it, after the first time I've done it, every other time I do that in a row, nothing is different. Do you know what I mean? Like it's still updating it to the same thing. Post is different. Post should change the state in some way because it's creating something. So a common way you might use post is like if your data store is, say, a list of points, and you have a post route that basically adds a point to that list, right? Because if you click it 1,000 times, you'll have 1,000 points, more and more and more points. So therefore, it's like kind of always changing the state. So that's one of the main differences between post and put. Taylor says, do you always have to manually create the body? Surely you can access the data stored somewhere. So what's important to understand in relation to Taylor's question there is that this ARC app is representing a front end that someone would normally program, right? You know how like with your iteration 1, we gave you stub functions? Stub functions on a server are typically something that someone building a front end would do to like just get their stuff working. And similarly here, it's like we're just kind of stubbing the front end on the other way around. So like in reality, someone would actually be programming an entire front end that would be making these requests and doing all this stuff for you. We're just like pretending to be a really dumb version of that front end, right? So normally what would happen is like on like, think about these slides, the actual web page here, all this code is doing the exact job of what ARC would do. It's sending things off and getting them back and doing something with it and sending more of them off. But we don't do front ends in this course. So on that topic, there are three main ways to actually talk to Flask or talk to web servers in general, which is through a like an API client for developers, like a GUI, like ARC. There's also other ones I mentioned, Postman and Insomnia. I've used Postman in the past. I use Insomnia nowadays. ARC I think is great for this course because it's nice and easy, right? Because like Postman's great, but it can be like overkill. But they're all fine. You know, go try them out, figure it out which one you like. If we do have something HTTP like in the exam, we'll probably give you ARC just as a standard. We talked about ARC. The other way you can make requests is a web browser. This is what we talked about at the start of yesterday. The thing with web browsers though is they can only make GET requests. And I think I mentioned this where like if I load up a bit with a bit of the web browser stuff, you'll see that when I load this page here, and I look at the page loading, that it's always a GET request. So web browsers are essentially GET request tools. They're there to make GET requests to load web pages. Whereas APIs are a little bit different. The difference between like a normal web page is a normal web page is actually returning you HTML and all this other stuff. Whereas like an API is typically the exchange of data. Like most APIs are just accepting JSON and sending JSON. They're kind of very different to what requesters use to actually load a web page. That's why I said yesterday that like what actually happens in reality is that when you operate with a back end and a front end, you on the front end will tend to call the server once at the start to get the initial page, to actually like render the whole page. And then all the stuff that happens after that, while the page hasn't been reloaded, is you making API calls, typically exchanging JSON. So this initial page on Google, for instance, has to load, but you'll see that as I type in different keys and stuff, see how it's like kind of quietly making requests here in the background, right? Like you can actually see it. These are all like API requests. And when I click on one of these are all GET requests as well, but the body here is probably going to, in some cases, something here, the body might be JSON or something. So web browsers aren't really like a meaningful way that we use to go through it. The third way and the last way is using a requests library in Python. So Python 3 comes with a requests library that it basically allows you to programmatically make HTTP requests. So it allows you to do what you do with ARC, but you can do it with code, right? And I'll give you an example of this just so we can poke around with it. I'll get rid of ARC because I'm mad at it. Mad at Chrome, I guess. But let's have a look at a simple server, right? We've got this really simple server here called like echo.py, and I could run that server by running python 3 echo.py. And it starts up a server on port 5000. It has a simple route which goes and gets a data variable from the URL, and then it turns that into a dictionary and it returns that. I might just change this to like my stuff or something. And I actually might load up ARC again just so that we can quickly like correlate our understanding here. So if I load up ARC and I close Chrome, I could actually call this echo endpoint here. It's a get method. So get, I've got the URL right because that's what's on Flask. I've got the route right. It takes in one URL query string, which is data, which is like data equals, Hayden Smith, sure. And then I click send, and I get an echo of that, right? It returns me a JSON string that is just the JSONified Python dictionary of the key my stuff and the value of whatever was passed in by the URL. So we know we can do that with ARC just by clicking some buttons and stuff. That's what we've been doing for the last like hour roughly of lectures. But you can also do this on command line programmatically, whereby you use the request library. So in Python, there's a particular library called requests, which you can import. And it's a very straightforward library to use because what you basically do is you get the request library object, and then you simply say .get, .post, .put, or .delete, which is saying I want to make an HTTP GET request or a PUT request or a POST request or a DELETE request, and then you give it the URL that you're interested in here. So in this case, we're like request.get, go and get this URL here, and then we extract the response in JSON. So just to be clear, this here is your web server. This here is your backend. This here is actually what's like running. What we're doing with Echo Main here is we're emulating the effect of ARC, which is kind of like emulating a front end. So this here is pretending to be like a front end, like a web browser, talking to your server. So you've got your server running here, right, this echo.py, but in another terminal over here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run echo main.py, which will actually run this code. And you can see what it does is it makes the request, it gets the response, and then it prints the response. And then we've wrapped it in like an if name equals main. And you can actually see, like, watch one of your Python programs talk to your Flask server. Right, every time I run this, it's a bit slow here for some reason. It makes the request, but you can see every time it makes, oh, I didn't run it. Yeah, every time it makes the request, the Flask server is actually picking up on it. Girachand asks, why is the key data and not my stuff? The key's data because that's what we gave the URL parameter here. Oh, you're asking here, why is it data? I think that's just because that's old. I didn't reset the, sorry, thank you. Probably didn't reset it, is my guess. Maybe I did. Maybe there's another problem. So I run it now. We get my stuff as high. I just didn't restart the Flask server. So it's pretty straightforward. You can actually write like Python code like that to call web routes and stuff. So this is emulating the front end here. Let's talk about that last slide here. We'll talk about this when it comes to iteration 2 soon. No, we don't expect anyone to build any front ends in this course. We're not really building any front ends. We'll mention that when we talk about iteration 2. So this pretty much ties off everything I want to talk about in relation to like Flask and Python. The next lecture is going to be on testing with Python, which is basically a very short slide. It's a very short deck where we basically just go through the request library a little bit more. So we'll do that after the break. Then we'll talk about iteration 2. And if we have time, we'll do our little Teamwork Tuesday. And last question, Catherine says, is Chromium the only way to get Arc? No, you can get Arc on Firefox. You can download it standalone as well, as in you can just like download it from the internet. Generally, it's always good to download things as web browser apps because they're more secure. Web browsers are kind of like these little virtual machines. So in general in life, where you can, it's always good to download things as browser add-ons. I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Survey. Yeah, so we'll quickly I'll do the survey. Thank you. You're all so smart. So this ends like everything we're learning about building Flask servers. Now, after the break, we're going to talk about how to test them. Testing them is really easy, so won't take very long. But yeah, we're going to have a 5-minute break now. We'll come back at like 11:05, and I'm sending the survey on the chat now. So yeah, have a 5-minute break, and we'll chat in 5 minutes. Sounds good.